So once upon a time, Namco made an arcade shooter called Xevious, where you flew over terrain and bombed stuff. It was dangerous, it was devious, it was fun, it was popular even, to merit some home ports, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. Later, Namco released an arcade sequel called Super Xevious, which is just Xevious but made harder with new enemies and stuff. That's not the game we got with today's subject matter. Today's subject matter, Super Xevious, GAMP No Nazo, released in 1986 for the Nintendo Family Computer and having seen a re-release as part of the recent Namco Museum Archives, a collection of Namco's old NES releases. And that's what we'll be playing off of today, since we need to justify the existence of this collection of mostly substandard NES ports of classic arcade games. Well, the first volume is mostly substandard NES ports, and they tossed in Splatterhouse and a high-end NES remake of a later Pac-Man game. The second volume actually has some slightly interesting stuff, and this is one of them. Well, to me at least, not necessarily anybody else, but I digress. Super Xevious, The Riddle of GAMP. Apparently that's what it's called, okay. Unlike the similarly titled but lacking a subtitle arcade counterpart, this is a new game with new levels to explore and new enemies for you to contend with, but ultimately remains similar to the classic Xevious formula. You control a little ship armed with guns to kill airborne enemies and bombs to crater ground targets. The enemies you encounter change depending on how well you perform. So far so good. However, unlike in Xevious, you're not just shooting aimlessly at enemies in order to attain a high score. Instead, you'll be flying through different levels and exploring different pieces of terrain, and unlike the common shooter, in order to progress on to the next segment, you'll have to accomplish some additional task, be it flying into a specific cloud, destroying a specific target, getting a specific power-up, or some other unwritten condition that you'll have to uncover for yourself, or else you'll merely loop the current segment, with each subsequent loop being more and more challenging. It's this caveat that makes GAMP No Nazo an interesting take on the classic shmup formula. Well, that or this needlessly annoying little hurdle that hampers a surface-level fine game. Gameplay as a whole, and beyond that one caveat, is traditional Xevious. That is to say, you fly around, you use your guns to shoot airborne enemies, you use your bombs to destroy ground targets, that sort of thing. This one does have occasional power-ups that will boost your weapons or the range of your bomb blasts. Of course, these upgrades are lost should you lose a life, but hey, there are upgrades in a Xevious game, which I'm sure will make some folks happy and be able to play this slow-paced shooter that throws everything at you in an effort to make your life miserable, and that last bit hasn't changed in the slightest. Really, beyond the riddling riddles and new terrain and baddies and a few power-ups, it's pretty much the same Xevious as the original game, or at least the Famicom port of the original game. And if Xevious in its original form didn't suit your fancy, there's little here that's going to change your mind, and quite frankly, you're a lost cause anyways, but I digress. Control in Super Xevious works wonders, and you could hold the button down for rapid fire action. The bombs or the blaster, whichever one works. It's only useful for resting your thumbs, as button mashing will get you a faster rate of blaster fire anyway, so it's kind of a moot point, but it's there if you want it, and controlling your ship is just fine. Super Xevious sports a similar graphical quality to the original Xevious game on Famicom, nice looking ship designs and somewhat mediocre quality backgrounds, with a lot of the surface details relegated to solid colors. There's more interesting terrains for you to explore, flying through caves, flying over volcanoes, and more high-end installations which only look slightly nicer than the rest of the game. But honestly, this cave stage and its brown color could easily be mistaken for some other similarly colored work of nature, and the lack of detail hurts somewhat. In terms of sound, GAMP No Nazo has new jingles in the background, so there's some musical variety here, even if they're still subpar, substandard, sub-20-second loops playing constantly and eventually becoming grating. Yes, Xevious had one similar short tune that plays constantly, but it never got as grating as many of these jingles did. Oh well, at least the sound effects are solid. Some arcade-sounding sounds to go along with some new ones which fit the arcade-sounding sounds or something. Overall, Super Xevious GAMP No Nazo for the Famicom is just plain old Xevious with a new twist. Lots of new terrain to explore, lots of new foes to take down, some new toys to play with, but otherwise stays relatively true to the original formula. If you didn't care for the original Xevious, either the arcade or the NES port or whatever, there isn't much here that's going to ultimately change your mind since it's still a slow-paced, somewhat methodical little shooter. But for those who enjoyed that classic Xevious title, this is more of the same good stuff with some new flavor. I enjoyed this one, and it's certainly a highlight in the Family Computer library, and one of the finer inclusions on this Namco archive compilation thing, so kudos for that.